Today we're going to talk about why you should not draw with your brushes. Let's go. Okay, let's use hair as an example. We're going to use this model, the hair. We'll draw two similar hair sort of outline. So this is how typical beginners will go about sketching hair. They will use a very small brush and then they will draw individual strands of hair one by one, and they will basically go from the hair of the person, and they will just individually mark it out. I call this drawing with the brush, if you like, drawing individual strands of hair with a brush. Instead, what a beginner should learn to do is to treat all the hairs combined as an individual piece. Kind of like thinking about it as one piece rather than individual strands of hair. Well, yes, of course, hair is made of individual strands of hair, but that doesn't mean that's how you need to paint it. You should not paint or draw the individual strand of hair, but you should paint the entire hair together as a three-dimensional set, if you like. And you should use different colors to depict the different highlights of the hair, and you should allow shadows to creep in where the shadows will give you where the dark places are. And then on the edge, you use very tiny tool to indicate a little bit of hairs that's sticking out, like what I'm doing here with the back of my brush. This is an Escoda travel brush, and I use it to just indicate some outlier hairs. You should also learn to layer the various darks or light in the sense that now once the first layer is dry, I'm putting in the second layer of dark or shadow. By doing this, the hair looks more three-dimensional, they look more whole, they look more like one piece instead of the ghastly looking individual strands that is extremely hard. Well, of course, in many ways it takes unnecessarily too much time and too much effort as well when you're trying to draw every single strand of hairs. It's not a very practical approach either. And of course, even with the second layer, you can also touch up the edges to indicate more hair, some of the darkest spots that you can use to indicate how the hair curve out. That gives you an indication of hair. I'm going to use this Copic opaque white, and I'm going to mix a bit of gray, and I'm going to use that to also indicate more sort of highlight. If you can look at the hair, there are some parts that are sticking out because they are light version of it. I'm not going to be very accurate. I'm just going to use gray, and I'm just going to use it to indicate, and that's really what I'm trying to do, just to indicate that there are some highlights on the hair. There are some parts where the light hits it, and then it's just to give it a feel that it is hair. So as you can see, it becomes a little bit more interesting, a little bit more realistic, if you like, compared to the individual strand of hair that you were trying to draw with your brush earlier, right? So this is the hair example. Okay, let's talk about other examples. Hair is just one of those that you can use this technique, but again, don't draw the little individual leaves on the tree, just like the same on the grass, the dry grass that is. Don't draw the individual strand. Treat those like a 3D object that has sunlight area and shadow area. If you look carefully at the trees, of course there are holes amongst the leaves. That's one thing to see. But if you look at the group of leaves, on top there will be the sunlight area, at the bottom there will be the shadow area. And what you want to do is just to be able to differentiate those little individual shape at that point, to be able to indicate the tree construct. But what you want to do is also be able to touch on the edges, like what I did with the edges of the hair. You also touch up with the edges of the tree with individual leaves to indicate that it's a tree. Well, the next example is also pretty straightforward. If you look at this bush or this plant, the red color plant, you can treat the whole thing as if it is a single shape and a single plant. You can look at where the sun is lit. It's slightly to the left on top, and you can see the shadow is on the right bottom. So you could broadly paint them as one shape. And of course, what you need to do is then individually add the edge and some indication inside the big shape itself, the small leaves, and to make it represent the plant itself. And that's how you sort of need to think about sketching these things. Otherwise, you end up sketching every single leaf, and that's just not going to be a very aesthetically pleasing sketch. Well, final example is this fox. It looks like a sly fox. And if you can see the fur, you should treat them just like the hair, a single shape with shadow and light, and on the edge, fluff it out with a few lines of hair. And that is how you would draw an animal like this. It goes for sheep, or it goes for any of the other furry animals, squirrels, or even let's say, well, any furry little animal, basically, right? That's how you sort of sketch it, to give it a sense of texture and so on. But it's actually, the texture is on top of the three-dimensional shape, which you put as a single shape. Right? So what I'm trying to do is to help you think about the technique of single shape with edges and little texturing in the middle, to give it a sense of hair, fur, plants, leaves, and so on and so forth, without having to necessarily paint, or rather draw with your brush, which is what you should not do. You should never ever draw with your brush. Well, there's always exception, but if you're trying to do hair, fur, plant, leaves, you should never draw with your brush. Okay, I'm going to give you another example from one of my earlier video. I'll put a link up to the video here, but I'll give you a sort of a new commentary in that sense. If you look at the way I'm painting Max here, the foundation is what I meant by the single shape, right? If I'm looking at the snout, that is one single shape. They are not individual strands of hair, although you will see me texturing on top later on with different hair and so on. But I'm thinking broadly, very broadly. The collar, that's one shape. The body, that's another shape, and so on and so forth. So every one of these sort of major section of the hair or areas of the body, they are single shape that basically allows the viewer to see it in continuous term. Of course, once those big shapes are put down, then the fur and the texture, the edges, can start to go in, and that really gives you a sense of sort of texturing, if you like, a sense of it being a furry animal, right? I'm going to speed up because the original video is still there, and you can go back and watch that. I know many of you have not seen this video, and anyway, as I said, the whole idea at the base and foundation layer is to think broadly in big broad shape, and you can follow that. If you look at the values of the photograph, you will know where the big broad shape they are. Right now, once you finish the big broad shape, you can then start thinking about the individual strands or the texturing, and that's when I used, and if you look carefully, there are dark fur, there are grey fur, and there are highlighter fur, and so on. And that's when you use your very small, tiny sort of brush, and you go at it with gusto, and mostly on the edge, but some of them in the middle of the shape. And the other thing I do is to vary the size of the fur. Some are very tiny, some are slightly bigger, strand of hair is slightly bigger, and so on and so forth. Some are very, very large, but the other thing also is vary is also the values, mid-tone, dark, and gray and white as well. Because that's what I see. If you look at a photograph, that's what it is. There's plenty of values to the fur. It's not a single value. It's many, many values, and so on. Of course, the larger the painting, the more texturing you require, because your eyes can see a lot more details. Of course, in a sketching scenario, actually I'll call this more of a painting rather than a sketch, although most of the time I sketch. I do paint. Sometimes, in this case, it's a commissioned piece of work for a friend. So anyway, you could see that for this painting, it seems like I have drawn the individual strand of hair, just like how I tell you not to do. But no, actually, if you see the foundation, the way I painted, they were big blobs of shape, and that is a structure I've put in place. On top of the structure, I put in the texture of the fur. The texture of the fur sits on top of the foundation, which are very sort of three-dimensional shape with shadow and light and so on. And even though when you look at a painting like this or a sketch, you will find that the eyes go drawn directly into the fur, the individual strands and so on. But the reality is that the foundation sets the 3D nature of the painting itself, and that's what really matters in most of the cases where you have to deal with individual strands of fur, hair, leaves, and so on. The idea is the same, that you need to build those texture on a solid three-dimensional form underneath it, and that's the idea I want you to keep in mind as you're sketching anything with that nature. I hope you can learn to see the difference objects you're sketching, especially those that you require a lot of this texturing. And I hope this video helped you in some way. And I think it's one of the more difficult lessons, I would say, for sketchers to sketch this complex sort of fur, leaves, hair, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's it for me. wheeteck out. I hope you learn something from this video, and that you stay safe wherever you are, and take care. Bye.